Do you feel love, but always with fear? Do you feel love, but always with fear? Like something beautiful is about to vanish? Like the ground could collapse under your feet the moment you begin to trust? If that feels familiar, you're not alone. And it's not just you. It may be something much deeper than your current relationship, something you inherited without knowing. When our parents separate, the world splits in two. Not just the physical world, not just two houses, two bedrooms, two birthdays. What breaks, silently and invisibly, is the emotional ground under the child's feet. Love, that once felt safe and permanent, suddenly feels temporary, unpredictable, and threatening. Virginia Satir, one of the pioneers of family therapy, understood something powerful. A child does not understand the end of a marriage. She feels the end of the world. For the child, the love that once united the people who gave her life has now turned into distance, conflict, or silence. It's not just a family change, it's a collapse of emotional safety. Many adults carry that emotional fracture with them, even decades later. They appear strong, successful, even charming in relationships, but inside, there's a tightrope walk. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. These adults love, but always with fear. They fear being left. They fear being too much or not enough. They fear that if they truly relax into love, it will disappear, just like it did when they were children watching their parents' relationship dissolve. And that fear doesn't come with a warning label. It comes quietly, disguised as control, anxiety, emotional distance, or people-pleasing. A child growing up in the middle of parental separation receives no handbook. No one explains that her panic is natural, that her tears at night are not weakness, that her need to check if both parents still love her is not neediness, it's survival. Children are not built to hold adult grief, but in the absence of explanation and emotional presence, they absorb it anyway. They become the peacekeepers, the quiet ones, the ones who don't make trouble. They watch every word, every silence, every sigh, afraid of tipping the balance even further. And as they grow, this hypervigilance doesn't go away. It becomes the filter through which they experience love. Imagine trying to build a house on a foundation that cracked during an earthquake. No matter how beautiful the design, the structure feels unstable. That's what it's like to love after the love you first witnessed, the love of your parents, fell apart. Some carry the pain by avoiding love altogether. I don't want to get attached, they say. I'm not built for relationships, but deep down, they long for connection. Others chase love frantically, terrified of abandonment, trying to fix every crack, over-explaining, over-functioning, sacrificing their needs to keep the other from leaving. This fear is not irrational. It is ancient. It was born in a small, frightened child who saw the pillars of her world crumble. That child still lives inside the adult, whispering, "Be careful, don't get too close, don't let go, or you'll be hurt again." Virginia Satir believed that no wound was too old or too deep to be healed once it is named. She didn't believe in blaming parents. She believed in understanding patterns. Her work was built on compassion and clarity. People are not their behaviors. They are the sum of their experiences. If your experience taught you that love breaks, that connection disappears, that safety is an illusion, it makes perfect sense that you'd fear love. But now, as an adult, you have the power to revisit those early messages, to hold that inner child not with judgment, but with tenderness, to say, "I see why you're scared, but I'm here now, and we're going to learn something new." This is the beginning of emotional reparenting, the process of giving yourself the safety and clarity you never received. It means identifying the fear that shows up in relationships and gently tracing it back to its origin. That origin often sits quietly in a childhood bedroom where you heard yelling through the walls or where one parent packed a bag and never came back. It lives in those moments where you asked yourself, was it my fault? Or what could I have done to keep them together? Those questions were never yours to answer, but no one told you that. So now, in adulthood, many still carry the guilt, the confusion, the aching need to be good enough to keep love from leaving. They don't realize that love didn't leave because they failed. Love left because adults were in pain and didn't know how to stay whole together. The emotional inheritance of parental separation isn't just about divorce. It's about what was communicated or not communicated during and after. It's about the silence that replaced affection, the confusion that replaced consistency, the fear that replaced trust. But here's the truth. Love is still possible. Safe love, present love, lasting love. To get there, we must name what happened. We must look at our fear not as an enemy, but as a messenger, a voice saying, "I'm scared because I was hurt, not because I'm broken." The child in you still wants to believe in love, but she also wants to feel safe. She needs the adult you to guide her, to rebuild the bridge between love and security. That is the invitation of this journey, to transform the emotional inheritance of fear into the legacy of healing. To be the one who says, "The love I build now will not collapse like before, because I am building it with truth, with awareness, and with heart." This is not about blaming your parents. It's about reclaiming your story, and it begins with one honest question. Do you feel love, but always with fear? If so, this conversation is for you, and it starts now. The root of insecurity, the child who watched love end. There's a moment, often silent, that stays frozen in the memory of a child whose parents separate. A slammed door, a suitcase in the hallway, raised voices that suddenly vanish into long, aching silences. But what hurts most isn't what was said, it's what wasn't explained. And in the absence of understanding, the child begins to create her own answers, often painful, always personal. Virginia Satir observed this with heartbreaking clarity. When children witness the end of love between their caregivers, they don't interpret it as a relational issue between two adults. They interpret it as a reflection of themselves. If love ends, the child thinks, it must be because something was wrong with me. She begins to craft silent internal stories. Love is unstable. I'm not enough to make people stay. If I get too close, I will be hurt. These stories aren't conscious, but they shape the way she sees herself, others, and relationships for years, sometimes for life. When the people who gave her life cannot remain connected, the child's inner world fractures. And children, being egocentric by nature, turn the spotlight inward. What did I do? Was I too difficult? If I had behaved better, would they have stayed together? These thoughts are not logical. They are emotional truths etched into a mind too young to reason, but old enough to ache. A child doesn't need a perfect home. She needs a stable emotional ground. When that ground shakes, she does the only thing she can. She tries to find a way to feel in control. And if blaming herself gives her even the illusion of control, then she will carry that blame, silently and loyally. In families torn apart by separation, explanations are often minimal. Parents, wrapped in their own pain, forget to speak to the child's heart. "It's not your fault" is said once, if at all, and rarely with the depth and repetition a child needs to truly believe it. The result? A child left to interpret a profound emotional event with the limited tools of her young mind. Satir taught that the narratives we form in childhood become the emotional blueprints of our adult lives. The child who believes "I'm not enough" becomes the adult who overcompensates, pleasing, perfecting, performing. The child who believes "love always ends" becomes the adult who sabotages closeness or clings too tightly out of fear. The child who believes it's dangerous to trust becomes the adult who keeps walls so high that no one ever truly gets in. What began as a survival strategy becomes a silent prison. And the most tragic part? Most of these adults don't even realize they're living according to old, inherited scripts. They think they're just bad at relationships, or too independent, or unlucky in love. They don't see that they're still carrying the emotional weight of a love story that ended long ago, one that had nothing to do with them, but shaped everything about how they now love. Imagine a child watching the people she loves walk away from each other. She doesn't understand adult conflict. She only sees the loss. She doesn't understand emotional incompatibility. She only feels rejection. And so, to survive, she rewrites the narrative in the only way she can. If I were different, this wouldn't have happened. It's cruel, it's heartbreaking, and it's common. Virginia Satir believed in revisiting these internalized stories with compassion. She often said, "The problem is not the problem. The problem is how people cope with the problem." And children, with their limited understanding, cope by inventing reasons that feel safer than chaos, even if those reasons hurt. Because believing "I'm unlovable" is paradoxically easier than believing the world is unpredictable. At least in the first version, there's something she can fix, or so she thinks. The problem is that this belief system becomes embedded. It becomes the emotional lens through which every future relationship is viewed. And unless brought to light, it distorts reality. An act of love, seen as suspicious, a need for reassurance, viewed as weakness, a healthy boundary, felt as rejection. The child within is always watching, always interpreting, and often misinterpreting what adult love looks like. And the adult self struggles to connect deeply because they're protecting wounds that never healed. So what can be done? First, awareness. Recognizing that these stories are not the truth. They are adaptations. They were written by a child who was trying to understand a painful situation with no guidance. That child did the best she could. But now, you are the adult, and you can write something new. Second, compassion. Not just for your younger self, but for your current self, who may still struggle to trust, to relax, to believe that love can last. There's nothing wrong with you. You're responding to an old wound that deserves care, not criticism. Third, rewriting the narrative. This doesn't mean pretending everything was fine. It means updating the story. My parents separated. That was painful. But it wasn't because I was unlovable. This shift, simple as it sounds, can transform everything. Satir's work was rooted in the belief that families don't need to be perfect to be healing. They just need to be real. And the healing starts not when the past is erased, but when it's acknowledged and understood. You may have seen love fall apart. You may have believed for years that it was your fault, but the truth is this: love is complex, and the adults around you were likely doing their best with what they knew. That doesn't make the pain less real, but it does make the meaning changeable. You are not the broken product of a broken home. You are a full, feeling human being carrying stories that were never yours to hold, and you have the right, the responsibility to question them, to soften them, to rewrite them, because love doesn't always end, and trust, though fragile, can be rebuilt. Not with denial or forced optimism, but with truth, with healing, and with heart. The root of insecurity is not weakness. It is unspoken grief. And when that grief is given space, when it is held instead of hidden, something powerful happens. Insecurity begins to loosen, fear begins to fade, and the story, your story, begins to change, not from the outside, but from within. That is the beginning of emotional freedom, and it begins by seeing the child inside you, not as broken, but as brave. The fear of abandonment, the pain of being left behind. There are wounds that bleed silently, wounds that don't leave visible scars, but live in the nervous system, in the chest, in the way someone hesitates before trusting, before relaxing into love. One of the deepest and most invisible of these wounds is the fear of abandonment, a pain that begins early and shapes every connection that follows. When one parent leaves, whether physically through separation, divorce, or absence, or emotionally through detachment, silence, or neglect, the child experiences more than just loss. She experiences disconnection from the very source of her emotional survival. For a child, a parent is not just a caregiver. That parent is the world. When they become absent, the world feels unsafe. Virginia Satir understood that children don't separate behavior from love. If a parent becomes distant, the child doesn't think they're going through something. She thinks they're going away because of me. If a parent physically leaves the home, the child doesn't process it logically. She feels emotionally abandoned, even if the parent remains partially present. And this abandonment, whether partial or complete, doesn't end with childhood. It seeps into adulthood in ways that are subtle but powerful. It becomes the adult who panics when someone doesn't text back, the partner who needs constant reassurance that they are still loved, the friend who overgives to avoid being left behind, the person who pushes people away first, just to avoid being rejected later. This is what abandonment fear does. It teaches the nervous system to live in a state of constant emotional hypervigilance. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every delay becomes dangerous. Every shift in tone becomes a signal of potential loss. And the worst part? Most people living with abandonment wounds know their reactions are extreme, but they can't stop them. Because their body, not just their mind, learned to associate closeness with threat. They were once close to someone they loved. That person disappeared, drifted, or stopped showing up emotionally. And so, their entire being learned a painful rule. If I love, I will be left. That rule becomes a survival strategy, one that never truly brings peace. Some try to avoid closeness altogether. Better to be alone than to risk the pain of being left again. They tell themselves they're independent, self-sufficient, or not the relationship type. But underneath the armor, there's often a lonely child still waiting to be chosen. Others swing to the opposite extreme, clinging tightly, emotionally fusing with partners or friends, reading too much into every word or gesture, trying to prevent abandonment before it can happen. They don't realize that the intensity of their fear often pushes people away, reinforcing the very story they're trying to escape. Virginia Satir believed that people do not fear love, they fear loss. And for those who have been left, even once, even emotionally, love is always at risk of vanishing. Imagine being a child and seeing your parent walk out the door or sit silently at the dinner table, unreachable. That child's heart doesn't ask for explanations. It just aches, it waits, it hopes, and eventually it starts to protect itself. That protection, though necessary at the time, becomes a barrier in adulthood. You can't build trust when you're constantly scanning for signs of betrayal. You can't rest in connection when your nervous system is always preparing for goodbye. You can't receive love deeply when a part of you is already rehearsing the pain of losing it. This is the legacy of abandonment. Love becomes a battlefield. Safety becomes conditional. Joy becomes a trap. And vulnerability feels like danger. But here's the truth that many never hear. You were not left because you were unworthy. You were not emotionally abandoned because you were too much or not enough. You were left because someone else, your parent, didn't have the capacity, presence, or healing they needed to stay connected. That is not your fault. It was never your fault. Still, your body doesn't know that yet. Your heart may not believe it yet. That's why the healing must go beyond words. It must reach the places where fear lives. Virginia Satir taught that emotional wounds require more than logic to heal. They require new experiences of safety, of presence, of staying. They require the adult you to become the parent you needed, consistent, kind, and unshakably there. And that starts with recognizing the signs of abandonment fear in your daily life. Do you panic when people pull away? Do you overanalyze distance, trying to guess what you did wrong? Do you try to become perfect to keep others from leaving? If so, you're not broken. You're responding to a pain that was never fully held, but you can hold it now. You can pause when fear rises and say, I see you, I know where you come from, and I won't abandon you, even if someone else did. That voice, your own voice, becomes the beginning of safety, not safety that depends on others, but a deep, internal safety that no one can take away. Because when you start to show up for yourself, consistently, lovingly, and without disappearing, you begin to rewrite the story. You begin to teach your heart that not everyone leaves, that closeness is not always a prelude to loss, that you can trust, not blindly, but bravely. The fear of abandonment is real, but it is not a life sentence. It is a doorway into the parts of yourself that are still waiting to be reassured. A doorway into the child who needed someone to stay and can now learn that you will. A doorway into love that doesn't hurt because it's built on presence, not panic. Virginia Satir once said, "We must not allow the wounds of the past to define the possibilities of the future." So today, let this be a turning point. You may have been left behind, but you are not alone. And you don't have to keep running from the pain. You can stop, you can turn inward, and you can begin the slow, steady process of healing the part of you that still watches the door, waiting for someone to disappear. Because now, you are the one who gets to stay. You are the one who says, I won't abandon myself. And that is the beginning of peace. Chronic distrust. When love becomes a risk love, the very word promises safety, closeness, and joy. But for some, it brings something entirely different. Alarm bells. Not because they don't want love. On the contrary, they crave it. They dream of it, but they fear it just as much. This is the tragic contradiction for those who carry the imprint of unstable love. They want intimacy, but don't trust it. They long for closeness, but expect it to vanish. They desire connection, but suspect betrayal around every corner. Virginia Satir understood this deeply. She taught that every relationship needs an internal foundation of safety. But when that foundation was never built in childhood, the adult doesn't know how to rest in love. Instead, they brace for pain. When a child grows up with inconsistent caregivers, one day warm, the next cold, 1 week present, the next vanished, the message isn't clear love, it's conditional love. It's, I'll love you when, or I'm here now, but don't count on me. That instability becomes the lens through which all future love is viewed. The nervous system learns love is unreliable. People change without warning. Attachment means vulnerability, and vulnerability means pain. And so, distrust takes root, not as a choice, but as a defense. This leads to the cycle of emotional sabotage, often invisible to the person living it. 1. Fear. At the beginning of a relationship, everything feels exciting, but under the surface, fear simmers. What if they leave? What if I'm not enough? What if I open my heart and they break it? This fear may be quiet, but it drives everything. 2. Control. To manage the fear, the person unconsciously begins to control. They may try to define the relationship quickly, seek constant reassurance, read into every silence. They might monitor behaviors, texts, replies, tone. They want certainty. They crave stability. But what they're really trying to do is control the outcome. 3. Sabotage. Eventually, the need to control becomes overwhelming for them and for their partner. The relationship begins to suffocate. There's no room for natural growth because trust is replaced by suspicion. Small things become big things. An unanswered message becomes a crisis. And often, before the other person can leave, the one with fear of betrayal ends it first. I knew it wouldn't last. 4. Isolation. After the storm comes the silence. Loneliness sets in. The person mourns not only the loss of the relationship, but the hope that maybe this time it would be different. And the inner voice returns. See, love isn't safe. And the cycle begins again. This is the exhausting pattern that so many repeat, not because they're broken, but because they never learned how to feel safe in love. Virginia Satir believed that trust is not automatic. It's learned. And if you never saw it modeled, you must build it from the inside out. When your early experiences taught you that love disappears, that connection comes with strings, or that affection can turn into rejection in a moment, your body responds accordingly. You don't just distrust others, you distrust yourself. Your own emotions, your own instincts, your own worthiness come into question. Why did I trust that person? Why didn't I see it coming? Why do I always pick the wrong people? These questions don't lead to clarity, they lead to self-criticism. And that, too, erodes trust, especially self-trust. So now, love becomes a battlefield, not of passion, but of paranoia. The heart wants to open. The mind says, not again. And every time someone gets too close, the walls come up, higher, stronger, quieter. This is what chronic distrust does. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Don't believe them. They're too good to be true. Stay one step ahead. And soon, love, once a possibility, becomes a threat. But here's what Virginia Satir believed. These patterns are not permanent. They are understandable. They are survivable. And they are transformable. You learned to distrust because it protected you. You controlled because you were scared. You sabotaged because deep down, being alone felt safer than being hurt. There is no shame in that. There is only an invitation to stop blaming yourself, to stop punishing others for wounds they didn't cause, and to begin building the internal safety that no one else ever taught you. Because real trust doesn't begin in the arms of a partner. It begins inside. It begins with you being honest about your fears. It begins with you slowing down when anxiety tells you to speed up. It begins with you noticing the urge to sabotage and choosing curiosity instead. It begins when you ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen? Is this about this person, or is this about my past? Can I give this connection a chance to grow without demanding that it prove everything today? Trust is a muscle. If it's weak, it's not because you're incapable. It's because it was never exercised safely. Now you get to train it, gently, consistently, with grace. And maybe that means trusting that you can be okay, even if someone leaves. Maybe it means trusting that not everyone is out to harm you. Maybe it means trusting yourself, your voice, your boundaries, your ability to choose again. Because what you fear most, losing love, is not inevitable. But living in fear of losing love, that's a guarantee. Virginia Satir once said, I am convinced that behind every behavior, there is a positive intention. The intention behind your fear is to protect. But you don't have to live in survival mode anymore. You can open slowly. You can love mindfully. You can build relationships on trust, not because others are perfect, but because you're grounded. Not every connection will be safe, but you can be safe within yourself. And when that happens, love stops being a risk. It becomes a choice, not a desperate leap, but a calm, conscious step. One moment at a time, one breath at a time, one honest conversation at a time. Because you are not your fear. You are the one who survived it. And now, you are the one who can unlearn it. Unconscious repetition. When painful relationships become a mirror, there's something quietly heartbreaking that happens in many people's lives. They leave a painful relationship behind, determined to never go through that again, only to find themselves, months or years later, in a strikingly similar situation. The names are different, the places change, but the emotional script feels eerily familiar. Why does this happen? Why do people who swore they'd never tolerate betrayal end up with unfaithful partners? Why do those who long for emotional safety keep falling into chaotic, unpredictable love stories? Why do some people go from one emotionally distant partner to the next, as if searching for something they can't quite name? Virginia Satir, renowned for her work in family therapy, offered a powerful insight. We repeat what we don't understand until it hurts enough to heal. This idea goes far beyond willpower or choice. It touches something deeper, the emotional patterns etched into us in childhood. And one of the most persistent and mysterious of these patterns is unconscious repetition. Let's unpack what that means. When a child experiences emotional pain, abandonment, rejection, betrayal, emotional distance, that pain doesn't simply disappear as they grow up. It becomes stored in what psychologists often call the emotional brain, the limbic system. This part of the brain doesn't work through logic or language. It works through patterns, through emotional memory, through felt experience. So what happens when someone grows up with unresolved emotional wounds? Their brain unconsciously begins to recreate similar situations in adult life, not because they want to suffer, but because a part of them is trying to make sense of the past, to fix it, to finally be seen, heard, or chosen in the way they never were. The person might say, "This time will be different," but deep down, they are still seeking the same type of person, someone who triggers the same emotional responses. Why? Because they are trying to rewrite the story that once broke them. This is how pain turns into a loop. You were abandoned by a parent, so now you fall for emotionally unavailable partners. You try harder than ever to get them to stay, subconsciously hoping that this time someone will choose you and not leave. You grew up feeling unseen, so now you enter relationships where your needs are ignored. But you keep hoping that if you love enough, give enough, prove enough, the other person will finally notice you. You experienced chaos and conflict at home, so now you're drawn to intensity and drama, confusing emotional roller coasters with passion. Peace feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar to the emotional brain often feels unsafe. This repetition isn't weakness, it's a misguided attempt at healing. Your emotional brain is doing its best to resolve what never got resolved. It brings people into your life that resemble old wounds because it's hoping that this time the story will end differently, that the unavailable person will choose you, that the angry partner will soften, that the one who pushes you away will come back and stay. But the problem is, if you don't become conscious of the pattern, you can't change the outcome. You can't create a new ending if you keep using the same beginning. That's why so many people feel stuck in emotional déjà vu. They keep asking, why does this keep happening to me? When the deeper question is, what am I trying to resolve that I haven't yet faced? Virginia Satir believed that people are not victims of their past, but they are shaped by it. And until those old emotional stories are brought into the light, they will continue to play out again and again, often in painful ways. This doesn't mean you're choosing suffering. It means your inner child, the part of you still waiting to be healed, is searching for resolution, the only way it knows how: repetition. But repetition doesn't heal. Awareness does. Healing begins the moment you pause and recognize the pattern. Why am I drawn to people who don't choose me fully? Why do I feel more chemistry with people who trigger my anxiety than with those who offer stability? Why does peace feel boring and chaos feel familiar? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations to look within with compassion and curiosity, because often the relationship you're trying to heal isn't the one in front of you. It's the one you had or didn't have with a parent, a caregiver, or a first love that broke your trust. And here's the most important truth. Once you become aware of the repetition, you gain the power to stop it. You can start choosing differently. You can start recognizing red flags not as challenges to overcome, but as signals to protect yourself. You can start saying no to patterns that once felt like home, and saying yes to the unfamiliar piece of emotional safety. That may feel awkward at first, foreign, even scary, because your emotional brain has learned to associate pain with love, inconsistency with excitement, and rejection with attention. Rewiring that takes time, patience, courage, but it is possible. Virginia Satir often said, "The family is a microcosm of the world." The relationships you witnessed and experienced growing up became your first blueprint of how love works. And that blueprint, while powerful, is not destiny. You can redesign it. You can learn what healthy love feels like. Love that is steady, not chaotic. Love that communicates instead of manipulates. Love that respects boundaries instead of testing them. Love that feels calm in your nervous system, not like a storm. And you can learn to give that kind of love to yourself first. Because breaking the cycle isn't just about finding the right partner. It's about becoming the person who no longer needs to repeat the wound to prove their worth. It's about saying to your inner child, you don't have to recreate the pain to heal it. You don't have to chase people to feel loved. You are already enough. And when you live from that place, you stop searching for mirrors of old trauma. You begin attracting and creating relationships that reflect your growth instead. So if you found yourself trapped in emotional reruns, if you've wondered why every relationship starts differently but ends the same, if you feel like you're stuck in patterns you can't explain, you're not cursed, you're not broken. You're repeating what you haven't yet understood, but now you understand, and now you can choose. You can pause, you can reflect, you can take a different path. Because healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means not letting it dictate your future. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not follow your usual type, to stop seeking fire and start seeking warmth, to stop proving and start receiving, to stop surviving love and start living it. This is how the story changes. Not when someone else writes a new ending, but when you finally take the pen. The silent guilt, the burden of having to choose sides. Some of the heaviest burdens children carry are not visible. They don't come with bruises or tears. They're hidden behind quiet eyes, polite smiles, and an unshakable sense of responsibility that doesn't belong to them. One of the most damaging of these invisible burdens is the silent guilt that forms when a child is forced to take sides, emotionally, silently, or explicitly, during their parents' separation. It's a guilt that whispers, "This is my fault." A guilt that wonders, "If I were better, maybe they'd still be together." A guilt that silently asks, "Which parent should I protect?" When parents separate, the pain does not divide equally. It spreads, seeps, and often spills over, sometimes onto the child. And without meaning to, without awareness or cruelty, one or both parents may begin to lean on the child emotionally. The child becomes a confidant, a witness, even a stand-in partner for the parent's grief or anger. Virginia Satir, a pioneer in family therapy, saw this dynamic clearly. She believed that when a child is forced into adult emotional roles, they lose a crucial piece of their development, their right to be a child. She called this a theft of childhood, and she was right. No child should have to comfort a crying parent about the divorce. No child should be the one reassuring an adult that they're still lovable. No child should be asked to spy, to keep secrets, or to pick a side. And yet, so many are. It doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it's a small comment. "You're just like your mother. Don't tell your father about this. You're the only one who understands me." But those comments plant seeds. Seeds that grow into confusion, divided loyalty, and toxic responsibility. The child, eager to be loved, does whatever it takes to maintain harmony. She learns to read moods. She becomes a peacekeeper. She edits her emotions to avoid causing more pain. She stays quiet, agreeable, small, and beneath it all, the guilt grows. She may blame herself for the fighting, for the tears, for the silences. She may think, "If I didn't act out, maybe they wouldn't have split." Or, "If I had just tried harder to be good, maybe they would have stayed." This guilt is almost never spoken out loud, but it sits like a weight on the heart. And it doesn't go away with age. It follows her into adulthood. It becomes the inability to say no, because she still feels responsible for others' emotions. It becomes people-pleasing, because she learned love is earned through performance. It becomes emotional exhaustion, because she's been holding up the emotional world of others since childhood. Even worse, the silent guilt can interfere with her ability to form healthy relationships. She may unconsciously choose partners who need fixing, because she's used to being the fixer. Or she may avoid conflict at all costs, because conflict feels like a trigger of abandonment. Sometimes she'll avoid closeness altogether, because closeness has always come with too much pressure. This is the long shadow of silent guilt. It's not loud, it doesn't scream, but it shapes everything. And the tragedy is, she was never meant to carry it. She was never supposed to be the emotional therapist of her parents, never supposed to absorb the blame, never meant to be the emotional glue in a fractured home. Virginia Satir believed in returning children to their rightful place in the family, not as rescuers, not as referees, but as children, free to feel, free to play, free to be. She said, "Feelings of worth can flourish only in an atmosphere where individual differences are appreciated, mistakes are tolerated, communication is open, and rules are flexible." But a child placed in the middle of a separation learns the opposite, that love is conditional, that mistakes have high emotional costs, and that loyalty is a tightrope. What's worse, the child often can't speak about it, because to do so would feel like betrayal of mom or dad or both. So she swallows the confusion. She absorbs the weight. She smiles through the ache. And as she grows up, that guilt doesn't vanish. It morphs. It becomes emotional over-responsibility. It becomes the inability to let go of dysfunctional relationships. It becomes burnout, perfectionism, and a haunting sense that she's never doing enough. But there's a truth that breaks this spell. You were a child, and it was never your job to carry adult pain. Your parents' choices were not your fault. Their emotions were not your responsibility. Their relationship was not your battlefield. You didn't cause their separation, and you couldn't have stopped it. Let that sink in. Because healing begins when you stop carrying what was never yours, when you return the guilt to its rightful place, not with blame, but with clarity. When you begin to say, that wasn't my role, that wasn't my burden, that wasn't my fault. And maybe you'll grieve the childhood you didn't fully get to live. That's okay, because grief, when held with honesty, becomes freedom. Freedom to stop fixing, freedom to rest, freedom to feel joy without guilt. Virginia Satir believed that healing family wounds requires congruence, the ability to be fully yourself without distortion. But guilt distorts everything. It turns love into a duty. It turns presence into performance. It turns a child into a parent long before she's ready. So today, let yourself go back, not to the pain, but to the truth. You didn't fail anyone. You didn't cause the rupture. You simply loved people who were hurting, and you tried to survive. That survival made you strong, but now you don't have to survive love anymore. You can learn to receive it without guilt. You can learn to say no without shame. You can learn to love without losing yourself in the process, because the child inside you deserves to be free. Free from blame, free from roles she never asked for, free to simply be and to be loved. And as you give her that freedom, the silent guilt will begin to fade, replaced by something stronger: self-trust, self-kindness, and finally, peace. The lack of reference, growing up without a model of healthy love. What does healthy love look like? It seems like a simple question, but for many people, especially those who grew up in emotionally chaotic homes, the answer isn't just unclear, it's unknown. You can't build something you've never seen. You can't feel safe in something that always felt dangerous. You can't trust love if love, for you, was always mixed with fear, control, silence, or pain. This is the silent struggle of those who grew up without a reference for healthy love. Virginia Satir, a pioneer in family therapy, understood that families are where we learn our first language of love, not the spoken kind, the emotional kind. We learn how people connect, how they fight, how they make up, how they show affection, how they treat themselves and one another. And if that first environment was marked by distance, volatility, resentment, or manipulation, then the emotional blueprint passed down is broken, not by intention, but by example. Imagine a child growing up in a home where love was never modeled with stability. Maybe their parents fought constantly and then never truly made peace. Maybe affection was rare or only appeared when someone performed perfectly. Maybe there was emotional distance, neglect, or inconsistent connection that left the child in a state of chronic confusion. This child doesn't grow up learning what love is. They grow up learning what survival is. And then they become adults. They enter relationships. They crave connection, but they don't know how to navigate it. Their emotional GPS is missing. Or worse, it's pointing them in the wrong direction. When you've never seen love done well, you don't know what red flags are, or you ignore them. You don't know what true intimacy feels like, so you mistake intensity for closeness. You don't know what safety means in a relationship, so you choose chaos because it feels familiar. This leads to two common responses. 1. Emotional detachment. Some people react to the confusion of their past by shutting down. They learn early on that vulnerability leads to pain, that feelings create conflict, and that depending on others is risky. So they build emotional walls. They become distant, logical, controlled. In relationships, they may seem cold, disinterested, or unavailable. But beneath that armor is a terrified heart, one that never learned how to be held without fear. They want connection, but connection feels unsafe. They want love, but they only know how to manage, not feel. 2. Excessive attachment. Others respond in the opposite direction. Because they never received stable love, they cling to any sign of it. They attach quickly, intensely, and often desperately. Every relationship becomes the one. Every argument feels like a threat of abandonment, and every silence echoes with rejection. They become overly accommodating, overly forgiving, overly available, often losing themselves in the process. They confuse love with sacrifice, attention with affection, possession with safety. And when things don't work out, when the person leaves, betrays, or pulls away, the emotional collapse feels like confirmation. I was never meant for love. But the truth is not that you're unlovable. The truth is that you were never shown how love works. Virginia Satir believed that people are shaped, but not doomed, by their early experiences. She emphasized the power of awareness, compassion, and conscious choice. Just because you grew up without a healthy model doesn't mean you're incapable of healthy love. But to move forward, you must first acknowledge the gap. Ask yourself, what did love look like in my childhood? How did the adults around me express affection or avoid it? Was love safe? Was it consistent? Was it something I had to earn? Did I ever feel fully seen and accepted, or only when I performed a role? These aren't easy questions, but they reveal the silent programming you carry, and unless you confront that programming, you'll keep recreating the same outcomes. Think of it this way. If you never saw someone cook a healthy meal, you wouldn't automatically know how to nourish yourself. If all you saw were fast food and chaos in the kitchen, you'd assume that's just how people eat. The same is true for emotional nourishment. You can't know what you weren't taught, but you can learn. You can unlearn dysfunction. You can rewire your understanding of intimacy. You can redefine love on your own terms. It starts with learning what healthy love actually is. Healthy love communicates openly, not with silence or manipulation. Healthy love respects boundaries. It doesn't test them. Healthy love feels calm, not like a roller coaster. Healthy love includes freedom, not control. Healthy love is consistent, not conditional. If none of this sounds familiar, that's okay. It simply means your journey starts here. Your job now isn't to blame your past, it's to break the cycle. To become the person who says, I may not have had a model, but I can become one. To be gentle with yourself when you stumble. To recognize that the discomfort you feel in peaceful relationships isn't a sign they're wrong. It's a sign they're new, because the nervous system gets addicted to what's familiar, not what's good. And if chaos was your baseline, calm may feel boring at first, but boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is often peace without adrenaline. Stay with it. Virginia Satir said, every word, facial expression, gesture, or action on the part of a parent gives the child some message about self-worth. Now, as an adult, you get to send yourself new messages. Messages that say, I am worthy of love that doesn't hurt. I am capable of building the love I never saw. I don't need to repeat the past to survive. I can rewrite it to thrive. You don't need perfect knowledge to start loving better. You just need presence, patience, and the willingness to unlearn what no longer serves you. Healthy love isn't a mystery. It's a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice. Practice naming your feelings instead of hiding them. Practice setting boundaries instead of abandoning yourself. Practice staying calm when your instinct tells you to run or cling. And above all, practice kindness. Kindness to the child who didn't know what love was supposed to feel like. Kindness to the adult who's still learning. You didn't fail because you struggle in relationships. You were simply handed a map with no clear roads. Now you're drawing your own. And that is the beginning of something entirely new. Not love as survival, but love as a sanctuary. Built not on what you witnessed, but on what you choose to become. The wounded self-image. I'm not worthy of love. There are wounds we carry that no one can see. They don't show up in medical scans or on the surface of our skin, but they affect every part of how we live, love, and relate. One of the most powerful of these wounds is a damaged self-image. The deep, often unspoken belief that I am not worthy of love. Where does this belief begin? For many, it starts in childhood, in the silent shadows of a home where love became uncertain. When parents separate, a child does not understand the complexity of adult relationships. She doesn't understand unmet needs, emotional disconnection, or long-standing resentment. She doesn't have the maturity to see that love can fall apart without it being anyone's fault. All she knows is that something broke, that someone left, and that it must mean something about her. Virginia Satir, the mother of family therapy, observed this pattern in countless families. She believed that children are meaning-making creatures. They don't just witness events, they internalize them. And when something painful or confusing happens, they don't think, this situation is flawed. They think, I must be flawed. So when a parent leaves, emotionally, physically, or both, the child doesn't interpret it as the parent's struggle. She interprets it as her own inadequacy. If dad left, maybe I wasn't lovable enough. If mom stopped hugging me, maybe I did something wrong. If they argued because of me, maybe I'm a burden. This is how the belief is born. Not through loud words, but through quiet absence. Not through direct insults, but through lack of explanation, affection, and emotional safety. And once planted, the belief begins to grow. It shows up in subtle ways. In the child who becomes the perfect student, always trying to prove her worth. In the teenager who accepts mistreatment in relationships, thinking that's all she deserves. In the adult who cannot receive genuine love because something inside whispers, this is too much for someone like you. The wound becomes a lens. Every compliment feels suspicious. Every act of kindness feels temporary. Every time someone gets too close, the voice returns. If they really knew you, they'd leave too. This belief isn't just painful, it's paralyzing. It creates a cycle of self-sabotage where the person unconsciously pushes away the very love they crave. They may become emotionally distant, rejecting others before they can be rejected. Or they may become overly accommodating, trying to earn affection by being everything to everyone. But deep down, they're operating from the same core wound. I'm not enough. And because they believe it, they collect evidence to support it. A breakup, proof. A mistake, proof. A moment of being overlooked, more proof. It doesn't matter how kind or loving someone is. The wound filters everything. This is what Virginia Satir called a low pot of self-worth. She believed that every human being has a metaphorical pot inside, a self-image, and that pot gets filled or emptied based on early experiences. For children of separation, that pot often gets drained too early, too fast, without nurturing words, without consistent love, without being told again and again, you are enough, exactly as you are. The child begins to believe the opposite. And here's where the tragedy deepens. People who don't believe they are worthy of love often end up in relationships that reflect that belief. They settle for crumbs. They tolerate abuse. They chase emotionally unavailable partners, not because they enjoy pain, but because that's what feels familiar. And to the wounded self-image, familiar feels safer than foreign, even when it hurts. So what's the way out? How do you begin to heal a self-image that was wounded before you had the words to describe it? Virginia Satir believed in reparenting, the idea that you can become the nurturing, affirming presence your younger self never had. That healing starts with recognizing the lie, because that's what I'm not worthy of love is, a lie. A lie told by pain, a lie whispered by abandonment, a lie you absorbed, not because it was true, but because you were too young to know better. To heal, you must speak a new truth. I am lovable. Even if someone left, I am still worthy. You must grieve the love you didn't get and then give it to yourself. Not in vague affirmations, but in real, embodied ways. By setting boundaries, by walking away from relationships that mirror your wound, by staying with yourself in moments of doubt instead of running toward validation. And slowly, the voice begins to change. The old belief, I'm not enough, grows quieter, and a new one takes its place. I don't have to be perfect to be loved. I am not broken. I am healing. I am allowed to receive love, and I don't have to earn it. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens in layers. It happens when you recognize that being left wasn't your fault, that your parents' struggles were not a reflection of your value, that love is not something to chase or beg for. It's something you're born deserving of. Virginia Satir said, I am me. In all the world, there is no one else exactly like me. Everything that comes out of me is authentically mine. You are not the reason someone stayed or left. You are not the outcome of someone else's capacity to love. You are not defined by who showed up or didn't. You are you, and that is enough. So today, if you still feel unworthy, if love still feels like something you can't quite trust, know this: you are not alone. You are not broken. You are healing. And the first step in that healing is to stop asking, what was wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me that made me believe I was unworthy? Because that's the truth. Something happened, but that something is not who you are. You are lovable. You are enough. And the love you seek begins with how you treat yourself now, not with shame, but with mercy, not with judgment, but with gentleness. Because when you begin to see yourself through eyes of compassion, the wound of unworthiness begins to close, not by force, but by truth. And in that truth, you don't just learn how to receive love, you learn how to believe you deserve it, because you always did. You just forgot. Now, it's time to remember. Healing through awareness, breaking the cycle. Some people spend their whole lives in loops, emotional cycles that repeat like a song on shuffle, different faces, different places, but the same heartbreak, the same fears, the same painful endings. It's as if something invisible keeps pulling them back into the same patterns, even when they desperately want to move forward. But here's the truth that changes everything. Repetition is not destiny. Virginia Satir, one of the great pioneers of family therapy, believed deeply in human transformation. She understood that people are not doomed to relive their wounds. But she also knew that change doesn't come from wishing. It comes from awareness. As she once said, people can change as long as they are seen, heard, and accepted in their essence. That kind of transformation doesn't start with others. It starts with you seeing yourself, because when you finally become aware of your patterns, you stop being controlled by them. Let's begin here. Why do we repeat pain? Why do we find ourselves in relationships that mirror the very ones that hurt us? Why do we sabotage love, push away safety, or cling to what doesn't serve us? The answer lies in the brain's attachment to familiarity and the heart's longing to heal old wounds. The child who is ignored seeks attention as an adult, sometimes in self-destructive ways. The teen who was abandoned clings desperately in relationships, terrified of being left again. The adult who never saw healthy love keeps chasing chaos, mistaking it for passion. None of this is weakness. It's survival. It's the emotional brain trying to solve unfinished stories. But what the emotional brain forgets is that repetition doesn't fix trauma. It reinforces it. So how do we break the cycle? Step 1. Recognize the pain. Before you can change a pattern, you have to name it. You have to look at the places where you feel stuck, the relationships that drain you, the choices that bring regret, the behaviors you swore you'd never repeat, and ask, what is this pain trying to show me? Don't look at it with shame. Look at it with curiosity, compassion. Virginia Satir believed that all behavior is communication. Even the dysfunctional parts of us are trying to say something. When we listen, truly listen, we begin to hear the real message beneath the chaos. I just want to feel safe. I'm terrified of being alone. I never learned what love without fear feels like. When you hear that voice, don't push it away. Hold it. Let it speak. Step 2. Reframe the belief. Most of our patterns are built on unconscious beliefs, inherited stories about love, worth, and safety. These beliefs were formed when we were too young to question them, too scared to understand. Beliefs like, love always ends. I have to earn affection. If I show my true self, I'll be rejected. But once we become aware of those beliefs, we can challenge them. Are they true? Who gave them to us? What happens if we let them go? Reframing means taking the same experience, the same memory, and seeing it from a new lens. Instead of, they left because I wasn't good enough, we say, they left because they were struggling. That wasn't about me. Instead of, I'm too damaged to be loved, we say, I learned how to survive. That strength is lovable. These new beliefs aren't just affirmations, they're truth-telling. They're acts of emotional rebellion, choosing to see ourselves not through the eyes of trauma, but through the eyes of truth. Step 3. Create new patterns. Awareness without action is incomplete. To truly break the cycle, we must choose differently, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unfamiliar. That means saying yes to relationships that feel calm, even if they don't come with fireworks. Setting boundaries, even if your voice shakes. Slowing down when your old pattern tells you to rush. Speaking your needs, even when you're scared of being too much. Creating new patterns means becoming conscious in the moments when you would have acted on autopilot. It means asking yourself, am I choosing this because it's healthy or because it's familiar? This is the work of building emotional muscles, trust, regulation, self-respect, all of which take practice. You don't need to do it perfectly. You just need to do it consistently. Virginia Satir didn't believe in fixing people. She believed in revealing them. She saw that healing doesn't happen by becoming someone else. It happens by finally being allowed to be who you really are, beneath the roles, the wounds, and the protections. So what does it mean to truly be seen, heard, and accepted? It means that your pain doesn't make you unworthy. Your patterns don't define you. Your past doesn't cancel your future. It means you are allowed to grow out of what once kept you small, allowed to feel anger at what hurt you, allowed to grieve what you never received, allowed to choose peace over chaos, love over fear, presence over protection. And it also means this: you are not your parents. You are not their marriage. You are not their conflict, their silence, their fear. You are the one who sees it all now and chooses differently. So if you've been stuck in a loop, if your relationships feel like reruns, if love still feels like a battlefield, know this: that's not your final chapter. Repetition is not your destiny. Awareness is the doorway. Reframing is the key. And conscious choice is the freedom waiting on the other side. You are allowed to break the cycle. You are allowed to love yourself without earning it. You are allowed to create a relationship that doesn't mirror your childhood, but honors your healing. And most importantly, you are allowed to be seen, fully, lovingly, exactly as you are. Because once you are seen, truly seen, the cycle begins to break, not through force, but through truth. And in that truth, there is healing. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that reclaims the present. Not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that welcomes growth. Not the kind that happens overnight, but the kind that changes everything over time. You are not repeating your past. You are rewriting your story. And with each step of awareness, you are walking toward a future where love is not fear, but freedom. A transformational ending, the love that can begin again. There comes a moment in every healing journey when the past no longer holds you hostage. Not because you've forgotten it, but because you've finally understood it. That moment doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic realizations. It arrives quietly, like a soft breath after a long run. It's the moment you realize you are not your history. You are what you choose to create from it. If you've walked with us through this journey, from the pain of watching love fall apart to the guilt, the fear, the repeating patterns, the confusion, and the wounded self-image, then you know how deep these emotional roots go. And maybe, for the first time, you're beginning to see the invisible threads that have tied your adult relationships to your childhood story. But today, we invite you to do something radical. Look at your family story not with blame, but with compassion. Not with avoidance, but with responsibility. Not as a victim of what was, but as the author of what can be. Virginia Satir taught that we are more than the roles we were given in childhood. We are more than the child who had to hold everything together. More than the one who felt abandoned. More than the fixer, the peacemaker, the invisible one. We are not frozen in the moment our parents' love fractured. We are not stuck in the emotional echo of their choices. We are here now, and we are awake. That's what awareness does. It doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it. It takes the chaos we inherited and gives us the tools to build something new. And what do we build? We build a version of love that is grounded, not anxious. A version of connection that is honest, not performative. A version of self-worth that isn't tied to being needed or perfect or chosen. We build relationships where we can speak our truth without fear, where we can receive love without guilt, where we can walk away from what doesn't serve us and not crumble, where we can offer love freely, not as a way to fix others, but as an expression of who we are. We build these things not by accident, but by intention. Every time we pause before reacting, every time we stay when we want to run, every time we choose honesty over protection, every time we give ourselves what no one gave us, patience, safety, care, we break the cycle. And cycle breaking is not easy. It is the work of a lifetime. It's the brave, messy, sometimes lonely work of facing what hurts so you don't pass it forward. It's crying over things that happened 20 years ago, not because you're weak, but because you finally have the strength to feel them. It's telling your inner child, you didn't cause this, but I'm here now, and we're going to love differently. This is the sacred power of conscious healing. You no longer live as a reaction to the past. You live as a response to your truth. You don't need perfect parents to become a whole person. You don't need a pain-free story to build a beautiful life. You don't need to pretend it didn't hurt. You just need to stop pretending it defines you, because it doesn't. You are not your parents' separation. You are not their silence. You are not their pain, their patterns, or their absence. You are the space where love can begin again, not as repetition, but as revolution. You are the one who chooses to speak when your family stayed silent, to connect where others withdrew, to soften where others hardened, to stay present where others ran. That is what it means to be the beginning of something new. You may not have been taught how to love, but now you are teaching yourself. You may not have received the blueprint, but now you are building the foundation. You may not have been held, but now you are holding your own heart with grace. And slowly, the wound becomes wisdom. The pain becomes power. The story becomes sacred, not because it was perfect, but because you refuse to let it end in silence. So we leave you with this truth, the one you can carry in every relationship, every choice, every breath. You are not your parents' separation. You are the beginning of love, with awareness, with courage, with heart. You are the reawakening of connection, the rewriting of old scripts, the redemption of broken lines. You are the restart, not of the pain, but of the healing. You are the re-beginning of love, now conscious and true. Say it with conviction. Say it with compassion. Say it even if your voice shakes. I am not my parents' separation. I am the re-beginning of love, with consciousness. And from here, everything can change.